It's the trick. That's right. Well, thank you for those of you who participated yesterday in bringing your cars. I don't know, I didn't know, was there a final count of cars? 15, 16 cars? Good. And then the crowd that came through, and we are so thankful for that. And just a great opportunity and outreach. I don't know how many of those who, as they were leaving, just came and thanked me that we put on that, or host that event, and they were thanking me for that. They really, really appreciate that. One was disappointed that we didn't serve our hot dogs and chili. So I told the family we were coming here for supper. Yeah, well, sorry about that. But anyway, thank you so much, and to God be the glory for that, as we keep being sensitive to those around us and into our community, that we would make an impact. So the question we always ask, and we bring this up to our board, is the question we think about in our ministry here in Bonner Springs is, if this church was no longer here, would it matter? Would it make a difference if this church was no longer here? And I hope that we would continue to keep asking ourselves that question as we live our life. If we are no longer here, would it matter? It's a good question, isn't it? It causes us to think about that. I invite your attention this morning to Psalms 24. Psalm 24. I know you're familiar with Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Psalm 24. If you'll turn your Bibles there as we begin today, and just when you find Psalm 24, it should be almost in the middle of your Bible. Hold it open. We'll get to it in just a moment. I promise. We'll get to it. But let's recite our motto together, shall we? Before we begin today. All together. Heavenly Father, I give you permission to speak to me, to speak through me, to do whatever you want with my life. I trust the leadership of your Holy Spirit. Amen? Amen. Amen. There was a Lutheran pastor by the name of Martin Taylor. He tells a very delightful story, which he says he heard from another pastor. That often happens at a pastor's meeting. The story goes that this young man, as a pastor, had been studying for the ministry and was asked to serve a small congregation in Canada over the summer months. His father, who was also a pastor, urged him to accept this opportunity, but he was very reluctant. He was young and inexperienced. The idea of serving a congregation, and especially the writing of sermons every week, just intimidated him, terrified him. And his father came alongside and said he would help him with that he would simply provide him with some of his old sermons that he could kind of recycle and redo as he needed, and help him along the way. Well, reluctantly, the son agreed to this proposal, and things went relatively well until the day a member of his congregation passed away. The son panicked. He had never performed a funeral before. He didn't even know this parishioner, even. How in the world could he prepare a message under these circumstances? Well, his father told him not to worry, that he had a funeral meditation that he had written to commemorate the life of one of his church's leading saints. A meditation, he said, that received a lot of accolades and praise, and surely he could get along with that one, and so he did. And evidently, the person that the father had eulogized was a person who had lived an exemplary life. And apparently, this was not the case for the person who had died in the son's parish. So, he found out that this fellow who passed away was rather a person of a scoundrel kind of person. And so the son rattled on about what a great saint the deceased was, and the family became increasingly uncomfortable because they knew it was all untrue. Finally, a young boy in the family, who had been overhearing his family's whispered comments about the inaccuracy of the young pastor's description of their dearly departed brother, the young boy broke the decorum of the funeral setting, and he came and stood in front of the pulpit and declared in a very stern voice, "Hogwash! Hogwash! This is all hogwash!" It's totally unhinged, the young pastor. He was stricken speechless. And all he could do was put his notes away, close his Bible, and said amen, and sat down. Well, certainly that deceased person was not a saint. At least not in the way we normally think of saints. Right? Now that I have your attention about that, let's reflect for a few moments this morning on what it takes to be a saint as we look at our text for this All Saints Day that we celebrate today. You know, that's kind of how Halloween came about, because it actually commemorates the Reformation Day, was yesterday, when Martin Luther nailed the theses on the door in Wittenberg, Germany. And the church decided to recognize the saints, those who have passed on before, to recognize them. And they called it the All-Hallowed Day, Hallowed Saints Day. And it turned into Halloween and ghosts and those kind of things because they were remembering the people who had passed. But it's actually All Saints Day. Today we commemorate that on this first Sunday in November. And so as we take a look at what it means or what it takes to be a saint, as we look at this text from the Psalms, and perhaps of all the books of antiquity, the book of Psalms is probably the most appealing, not just for the beauty of its poetry, but the poignancy and the authenticity with which the Psalms were written. Because in the Psalms we see the human heart wrestling with its own imperfections. Wrestling with its own imperfections. And we see the perfection of the God who calls human beings to righteous living throughout the Psalms. So here we are. Psalm 24 is a beautiful hymn. It begins like this. Look at it together. Psalm 24, beginning of verse 1. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Who may ascend the mountains of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. They will receive blessing from the Lord and vindication from God, their Savior. May God add his blessing to his word this morning. Amen. You see, this psalm marks a very important moment in Israel's history. It's the marking of a very important moment in Israel's history, because King David had just repossessed the ark of the Lord from Israel's enemies. This song was actually a song that was sung while a procession of joyous people was entering the city of Jerusalem, carrying the ark of the Lord, the ark of the covenant. This psalm has two main themes to it. The power and majesty of God as maker and sovereign over all the earth, and the righteous, or the righteousness required of men and women if they are to be blessed by God. We want to look at those two sides. So let's begin with the power and majesty of God. Number one, the first thing the psalmist affirms is that God is the ruler of all creation. God is the ruler of all creation. Look at Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, writes the psalmist, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. D.J. DeHaan tells about a time when he was traveling with his wife through northern Texas on Interstate 40. And they pulled off at a rest area. And in that rest rest area on a metal sign was a description of the area, and one sentence caught Dehan's eye, and it read like this: traveling the high plains of Texas is an experience in immensity. Traveling the high plains of Texas is an experience in immensity. And that's true. Texas is an immense state, right? A lot to see. But even Texas pales in significance to the immensity of creation. You say everything's bigger in Texas, not compared to creation. No, Texas pales in significance to the immensity of creation. And in fact, you just look up at the sky on a clear summer night, and if you live in the city, you may not see all that many stars, but depending on where you live, you may see a few hundred stars or several thousand of those glowing dots up through the sky. In fact, the astronomers tell us that there may be as many as 10 billion galaxies in the universe. There may be as many as 10 billion galaxies in the universe, and each galaxy containing perhaps 100 billion stars. We can't even imagine that, can we? It just blows our mind. In other words, not only are the stars that we see in the night sky far away from us, they are just a mere fraction of what's really out there. Immensity. Can you imagine the immensity? And here the psalmist, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, right? He writes, the world and all who live in it, for he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. The immensity of creation. But not just the earth. The billions of galaxies are his as well. It's just breathtaking if you truly try to get your mind around it. We worship a great God.
Amen.
The psalmist wants us to understand that. Get it in your head. You worship a great God. And if he's the God of the universe, then don't you think he can take care of your life?
Amen.
And mine? Yeah. Well, during the French Revolution, some men were determined to abolish Christianity. One night an atheist was loudly proclaiming his ideas to a poor man from out in the country, a peasant guy. And he says, everything one day will be abolished, said the atheist. Churches, Bibles, clergymen, yes, even the word God itself. We shall remove everything that speaks of religion. The poor little country man just chuckled to himself, laughing. Why do you laugh? Said the atheist. The peasant, poor guy, just pointed to the stars and said, I was just wondering how you and your crew would manage to get them down. In his simple way, he was right. The stars speak of God. The trees speak of God. The birds speak of God. All of creation bears witness to a God whose power and might is beyond our imagination.
Amen.
All of it, all of creation speaks to the power and might of God. And I realize this morning that there are those who refuse to recognize the evidence that God has provided. In fact, some of you might recall a man by the name of Yuri Gagarin. I don't know if you remember him or not, back in '61. The astronaut from the former Soviet Union who became the first man in space. And he said after his trip to space that he did not see God or any such being during his trip in space. After he made that comment, a priest from the Soviet Eastern Orthodox Church, upon hearing Gagarin's statement, said, if you have not seen him on earth, then you will never see him in heaven. If you haven't seen him on earth, then you will never see him in heaven. Someone else sarcastically pined that if he had stepped out of his space capsule without an oxygen mask, he would have seen God in just a few moments' time. Well, we understand what the priest was trying to say. Probably something like this, that if you are determined to shut God out, if you are determined to shut God out, then no amount of evidence will be enough to satisfy your demands. If you're determined to shut God out, He won't force His way in. No, you come to that on your own. If you're determined to shut God out, then no amount of evidence will be enough to satisfy your demands. Because most of us, to deny God's power and His might is to deny what has satisfied the curiosity of some of the greatest intellects who have ever contemplated the meaning of life. A lady, a nun, Sister Mary Rose McGee, in her book, Does God Still Love Me?, tells a wonderful story about a colony of mice who made their home at the bottom of a large piano, an upright piano. These mice lived in a world of constant music. Music filled all the dark spaces of their existence with lovely melodies and harmonies. Such a beautiful place to live. At first, the mice were very impressed by the music. They drew comfort and wonder from the thought that someone made the music. Someone, though invisible to them, yet close to them. They loved to tell stories about the great unseen piano player whom they couldn't see. Then one day, an adventuresome mouse climbed up part of the way in the piano and returned to the colony to tell them an elaborate explanation about how the music was made. There was wires, and they were secret. These wires were the secret, tightly stretched wires of various lengths that vibrated and trembled from time to time. And then a second mouse ventured forth and came back telling of hammers, many hammers, dancing and leaping on these wires. The mice decided that they must revise their old opinion. The theory they developed was complicated but complete with evidence. And in the end, the mice concluded that they lived in a purely mechanical and mathematical world. A world simply of wires and hammers. And the story of the unseen piano player was relegated to mere myth. But the unseen piano player kept on playing nonetheless. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For He founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. The first thing the psalmist affirms is that God is the ruler of all creation. Amen? Number two, the second thing that the psalmist affirms is that God demands righteousness from all who worship Him. Amen. God demands righteousness from all who worship Him. Look at it in these verses. The earth is the Lord's, everything in it, the world and all who live in it, for He founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. And then He asks, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in His holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart. You see, the temple, or the tabernacle of the Lord, sat on a hill. The hill on which it sat was referred to as the hill of the Lord. Very simple, wasn't it? Referred to as the hill of the Lord. It was referred to that because it was there, in that place, that God's presence was resident. God's presence lived and was connected to the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant that sat in the inner place of the temple. Wherever the Ark went, that represented God's presence. Very, very, if you read through the Old Testament, very important piece for the children of Israel. fact, those who tried to touch it when they were not supposed to died because of God's presence. Very revered. So the ark and the temple, very, very important. Now, why was this place holy? The temple and the place where the ark was. Why was it holy? It was holy because it had been separated. It had been separated for God's use. Separated. A holy God is separated and sanctified. And that's what the word sanctify means. Sanctify means set apart for a particular purpose used by God. Sanctified. That means that He is a unique God, in a class all by Himself. And any worship to Him must be offered from lives that have been separated or sanctified for Him alone. I suspect that the idea of clean hands and a pure heart is a concept that few people would comprehend in our society today. A society which is rapidly becoming cruder and ruder. The idea of separating oneself from such a society would seem to most people to be eccentric, perhaps. I mean, after all, who wants to be a saint? Who wants to be thought of as different in our world? But listen to me. While we don't want to stick out like sore thumbs, while we don't want to be too different, I suspect that people who are so completely dedicated, have so completely dedicated themselves to God, would know a peace that the rest of us can only envy. A person who is so completely dedicated and have dedicated themselves to God would know a peace that causes other people to envy. How is that possible? It is only possible as we sanctify ourselves, set ourselves apart to be used completely by God.
Amen. Amen.
For the word says, come out from among them, be ye separate. Yet Jesus said, they are in the world, yet not of the world. Right? So we are still living in this world, but yet to be different. Something about us, and that can only happen as we sanctify ourselves to God. For Him to fill us with His Holy Spirit, to make us holy people, used by God.
Amen.
In however way He sees fit. And as that happens, people take notice. They know there's something different about them. What is it? I'm just as human as you are. I'm just a tool that's been opened and has sanctified myself to be used by God. It makes a difference. That's how we change the world, one person at a time. A 14th century writer, John Toller, he wrote that there was once a great theologian who for 8 years in succession prayed to God to show him someone who would teach him the way to truth. And finally, one day when he was offering this prayer with great fervor and dedication, he heard a voice from heaven saying to him, "Go to the temple and you'll find him there." So he went to the temple and he found a poor beggar on the church steps, half clothed with a few rags and covered with sores. And moved with compassion, the theologian saluted the beggar kindly with the words, "God give you a good day, my good man." And he spoke up and he said, "I never have a bad day," said the beggar with a cheerful look. "Well then, God give you good fortune," said the theologian. "Well, I've never experienced any misfortunes," answered the beggar. The theologian, shaking his head, said, "How in the world can this be? You say you have never had bad days, you've never your life has been loaded with woes and miseries. Well, I'll tell you, said this financially challenged man, I have cast myself wholly upon the divine will, to which I so conform my own will that whatever God wills, I will also. So when hunger and thirst and cold and heat and sickness molest me, I do nothing but praise God. And whatever happens to me, whether it be prosperous or adverse, whether it be pleasing or unpleasant, I take all from the hand of God with great gladness. And that which can be good, since it comes from a cause which can produce only what is best for me. But, protested the theologian, if God should choose to send you to hell, what would you do? Well, I would immediately plunge into it, said the beggar. For you see, I have two arms. One is humility, by which I keep myself always attached to His most sacred humanity. And the other arm is love, which attaches me to His divinity. Now, if He were to cast me into hell, I would cling to Him so tightly with these two arms that He would have to be obliged to come with me. And with such companionship, it would not grieve me much, even to go to hell. Who in the world are you? Said the theologian. The beggar said, I am a king. And where is your kingdom? The theologian asked. It's in my soul, answered the beggar. For I know so well how to rule my faculties, both interior and exterior, that all the powers, inclinations, and affections of my soul are completely subject to me. Well, the theologian, taken back a little bit, said, tell me, how did you learn such great perfection? He said, by recollection, meditation, and union with God, said the beggar. I was never able to find peace in anything less than God before I succeeded in finding Him. And since then, I enjoy continual peace. And then the theologian said, and where did you find Him? Because I long for such peace myself. And this is what the answer to that question. The beggar looked up and he said, I found Him where I left affection for all other things. I found Him where I left my seeking, my affections, my love for anything else. That's where I found Him.
Amen.
In other words, this beggar found peace when he wholly gave himself to God. He found peace when he left behind his dependence on things or worldly concerns. Anything that might come between him and God. And he left it at the place where he found it. That's a message we need to hear today on this All Saints Day. Do you get the message? That there is peace. There is peace, perfect peace, to all who truly trust God. Amen. To all who truly trust God, there is peace. There is no peace anywhere in all the world that you will find except in God. And as you give yourself completely, entirely, sanctify, separate yourself to Him, you will find peace. So that's the question for you this morning as we lead. Do you want to be a king? Do you want to be a saint? Then trust God in all things.
Amen.
In everything.
Amen.
Trust Him. You say, yeah, but you just don't know, preacher. You don't know. You don't know what I have to deal with. You don't know what I'm worried about. You don't know what the doctors are saying about it. Trust Him in all things.
Amen.
And He will give you the desires of your heart. Today, as we celebrate and share communion together, what a wonderful opportunity for us to be reminded. God says, I've got your back. I've got you covered. I know you're weighted down. I know there's a lot of stuff you're worried about, but I've got you covered if you'll trust me. Because I went through it all. I went through it all. I gave my son, God says, who gave his very life for you, that you would be able to experience abundant life and peace that passes all understanding. Be reminded today as we share communion together that God is saying to you, if you'll trust me with your life, then I will do more than you can even imagine.
Amen.
Thank you, dear Lord.